So this session is one of 3 that I've been asked to do. The first session was to do with why ACCA and what your career aspirations might be. And then this one is to do with the practical experience requirement. And it's something that over my 15 years of teaching, I've had so many conversations with students asking them, can they please do their practical experience log early rather than at the end of their 3 years studying, 4 years studying. Now, I am ACCA qualified myself, and I was someone who didn't listen to my own advice, and I actually did the whole of the 3 years at the end of my qualification, and it was painful and it was difficult. So hopefully this session will show you what's required. It will answer a few questions as to what can be logged, what cannot be logged, what you have to do. It is a walk through the actual process, and I've done this session quite a few times, and when students have seen it, there's usually a reaction of, is that all that's required? And say it's so much easier if you can do it early on rather than 3-4 years later after you've got this experience. So I've got a slideshow here, and I say it is quite a lot of slides, but there are a lot of just screenshots of the process. So your practical experience requirement is required as well as your exams for ACCA. So you've got to do your 3-year log of experience. You've got to do your ethics module, which is a fairly new, probably been around 4 or 5 years now. And then also your exams. So exams, experience, and your ethics module. So this session is one to hopefully sell to you why it's good to do this. I know so many students who just do their exams and then they think they're qualified. And I talk to students who think they do their exams, they pass that final exam, which is such a relief when you get that email and that message to say you've passed the final one. But then they don't realise that they can't use the ACCA letters after their name. I get so happy when the post comes from ACCA and it's their magazines. We don't get as many now because they're all electronic, but the magazine used to pop through my letterbox and it would be to Claire Evans, BSc, so that was my degree, and then it would have ACCA after my name. You can't use ACCA after your name until you've got your 3 years signed off. And so many students just think they do their exams and then they can use ACCA and they become a full member. I know when I applied for this role as head of ACCA, I'd been a tutor for a number of years, but I didn't realise how many students for ACCA don't actually qualify. They just do their exams and then that's it. They remain affiliates rather than full members. And I did some research for the interview for this role, and I looked at the statistics for partially qualified, not full members for ACCA, CIMA, ICAW, SIPFA, quite a few qualifications. And ACCA by far is the one that has the most number of students who don't fully qualify. And it's something that ACCA are passionate about. They call it progression and completion. And every meeting I have with them on a quarterly basis, they always bring up progression and what can they do to get people fully qualified. So really getting it on your radar with this session, it's not just the exams, which are obviously hard enough and bad enough to pass, but there's also these other aspects as well. And it really is worth your while just doing that extra little bit of exercise to make sure you log your 3-year experience. So I'm going to do some screenshots and show you how you log it, where you log it, what the objectives are. So you have to hit some certain objectives set by ACCA. When I found that out as a student, I flew into a bit of a panic and I thought, oh my goodness, I work in audit. Does that mean I need to do some tax? Does that need to do some corporate governance? And it's not as bad as that. And I say that can be a barrier to people. They think they haven't got enough depth of experience. You don't need to have a bit of everything. You can just focus in certain areas. So I'll go over the performance objectives to show you which ones you need to do. And then there's obviously some you don't have to do if they're not relevant to your role. Another bit that I always get questions about is who can sign off this experience. And for some of you, that might be a surprise that somebody has to actually sign it off. So who approves that you are genuine and you're not lying in your evidence? And how do they get set up on the system? And again, I've got some screenshots. And if you're there thinking, I haven't got anybody that can sign it off, there are some workarounds and alternatives that are useful. And again, the fact that you maybe don't have an ACCA line manager might put you off, and that's why you've not done your practical experience, but hopefully this will make it more accessible again for you. So what counts, who can sign it off, why you should do it now, because it's not as scary as you probably think, A little mention of the ethics module, so the Epsom ethics module, which needs to be done as well as the exams, and then just hopefully some insights as to how to plan your appraisals, your work life, so you can incorporate this within them. So why would you want to become a full member rather than an affiliate? When you become a full member, I'll say the biggest thing for me was I can use ACCA after my name. When you've been qualified as a full member for 5 years, that becomes a fellow of the ACCA. So you become an FCCA. So my post now comes to a different address. It's to me, BSc FCCA, because I've been qualified more than 5 years. So you've got joining a big institution, a globally recognized institution. 86% of employers, when they were surveyed, said this was a recognized complete qualification. So they do recognize all of the aspects, that it is a well-rounded qualification, that it's got audit and tax in there as well. So very much a respected qualification, and people are aware that being an affiliate is not being a full member. So it is beneficial to make sure you become a full member. There are, at the latest count, about 220,000 full members, and that's across 182 countries. So there are a lot of accountants. There are even more not fully qualified accountants. So the members number is 220,000. The people that haven't quite got all those elements, the experience, the ethics module and exams, is far greater. So that was the one that really surprised me when I did my research for my interview for this job. How many people don't actually make that final qualification? So when you become a full member, you get access to research magazines, you get a qualified accountants magazine, electronic nowadays. You get access to some CPDs as well. So there's some payable CPD courses, but there are some free resources. You get access to technical support and technical queries. And say after 5 years, you then become a fellow, which means you can use FCCA to show you've got more experience rather than just the ACCA. So it is really worth just getting that final hurdle. And I say so many students don't, and it's just a tiny bit extra work to become a full member. So the PER overview. We're all aware of the exams, and obviously it was exam results day on Monday. So I'm hoping you had success if you did get exam results on Monday. So the exams, you've then got your ethics module, which you are eligible to do once you start your applied skills papers. And then you've got this 3-year practical experience. That's 3 full-time years. So if you are working part-time, perhaps a 50% role, that would mean you've got to do 6 years to get your 3 years, 36 months full-time experience. But I love this screen because it just shows the full complement of what you need to do to become an accountant. So you've got your exams, which we all focus far too much on, the ethics module, which tends to be an afterthought, and the experience, which is usually something people do at the end. And I really hope, if you take nothing else away from this webinar, please start thinking about doing that as you go along. Maybe every 3 months, every 6 months, just get it into your diaries as something that needs to be done, so you don't have a big shock, as I did, trying to do 3 years worth at the end. So it is 36 months of experience, so 3 years experience, and it needs to cover some performance objectives. These get reviewed every so often by ACCA, so do have a look on the ACCA website to see what the objectives are. If you are someone who's going to pick this up in 6 months, 12 months time, worth checking to see if the objectives change. But there are some objectives, you don't need to get every single one of them, but there is quite a big breadth of the objectives, and they've changed since I was doing them because they were quite narrow at that point. So you need to get 3 years, 36 months. And as I said, if you work part-time, or if you have a 6-month sabbatical or career break, that adds to it. So it needs to be a 36-month in total experience in a relevant role. Now, I teach a lot of international students, and they always ask me, what counts as a relevant role? There's lots of examples on ACCA's website on their PER objectives handout. And it tells you things like working in payroll, as an accounts clerk. There's some roles that you think, is that really a relevant role? So obviously working as a waiter or a waitress in a restaurant isn't going to be, but if you're doing cash books, reconciliations as part of that role, that element of the role would count towards this. If you do work experience for maybe you did 2 weeks internship at college, that 2 weeks would help and count as well. So just as you're going along, thinking about, have I already got enough for this 36 months? Have I already got maybe a year of this? I just haven't got round to logging this. So just start thinking about what you do. Is the role relevant? Some people will be just doing a job that is not relevant to fund the cost of studying, in which case starting to think, well, this job pays for the bills and pays for course fees, but where do I need to be to get the experience? So obviously you'll be exam qualified until you can then get the experience qualification. So what sort of roles are relevant? One's in accounting, so accounts prep, audit, financial reporting, insolvency. We're not seeing much of that at the moment, but insolvency, bankruptcy, payroll, management accounting, budgeting, corporate governance. There is an absolute huge list, and it doesn't encompass everybody's role, but I'm sure most of you have got some aspects, if not your full role is a relevant role. It can be in any organisation, so it doesn't have to be in practice. This is one of the joys of ACCA. It is accessible. You don't need to work in an accountancy firm. You can work in industry, you can do a bit of a management, project management role and partially do a bit of accountancy. You don't have to have a 3-year tied training contract, which some of the firms do require with their qualifications. So any role, as long as it is relevant, doesn't have to be fully relevant, but only that element of the job would count towards this 3 years experience. It can be part-time, it can be volunteering. So I do the accounts for my local parish, public sector council, that counts. I do the accounts for my local hockey club, that would count. And so part-time roles, voluntary roles. If you're someone who doesn't have a relevant job, you might decide to do a voluntary job and do their accounts for some of these organisations. That will start helping. It will be good experience then to get, obviously, you step into that first relevant role. So
Claire?
Hello?
It's Nikki. Can I ask, somebody asked, is teaching accounting considered a relevant role?
It is, yes. And I love obviously teaching accounting, but teaching accounting is a relevant role because you are looking at the standards, looking at the audit processes. I'm smiling because as a fully qualified member, you have to do CPD points. So you have to do so many courses every year and ensure that you've got so many hours of up-to-date experience. Because I teach, I just sign and go, I teach, and I don't have to do CPD because that's seen as being up-to-date and relevant. So if you are a tutor and you are teaching accounting or you're teaching audit, that is seen as a contribution as well. So that will count. Are there any other questions at the moment? It always entices lots of questions.
I can't see anything on that topic right now. I've got some other questions, but I'll keep that for later.
Perfect, that's brilliant. I'll make sure we leave time because this always asks people always want to know, well, I do this, will it count? I've got this person. So there's usually a few unique questions to your circumstances, which I'll try and help. But obviously ACCA do have lots of guidance on this, and obviously they will look at specific cases on a case-by-case basis. But absolutely, being a tutor, it wins a lot of things, so it would count for some experience, and it is one you can just get your CPD because I'm up to date to teach the relevant appropriate roles. Okay, so how do you fill this in? If you go onto your My ACCA account where you pay your exam fees, there is the ethics module, so the ethics module we'll touch on later, and there is also the per dashboard. This is just a screenshot. I have quite a few screenshots, but this is what it looks like. And it's just a dashboard of how you are doing, how you're tracking. Are you halfway there, 3/4 of the way there? So that's always nice and motivational just to see in one place, how am I doing in terms of the 3-year, 36 months ticking? And how am I doing in terms of how many objectives I have got? So you can see which ones you've done, and you can see how much of your 36 months it's calculated. When you go in, this is very much like filling in an electronic CV. It's so much better than when I had to do it by hand. So you go in, you log on, and you have to electronically put what your job is, your start date, and perhaps your finish date, or it's ongoing. You need to put how many hours you've worked per week. 35 hours, that's nice, is 100%. Anything less than that, it'll obviously only give you 50% of the contribution or 75%. So you need to go in and put your current role, and then you can go backwards if you've got other relevant roles that you've done in the past and somebody is able to verify that for you. And I'll talk about who can verify that, which means you might not be able to go backwards, but certainly you can put your current role in and you put your start date and you put your number of relevant hours. So if you did maybe being a waitress for half of the time and being a trainee accountant for half of the time, you would put that you've got 50% of that role is relevant. Obviously, I don't expect to do that sort of a mixture, but it gives you the example. So you've got there, when's your start date, and it's just an electronic version of a CV, so to speak, your curriculum vitae. You've then got looking down if you need to edit this role, and then you can see here you need to add a supervisor. So each of your, was that a question?
Let's say my employer is not ACCA approved. How can I report my PER?
So the person that's approved doesn't have to be ACCA qualified themselves. It would help if they are, but they need to be a qualified accountant. So as long as it's a recognised qualification, now apologies, I'm going to go UK centric here, but CIMA, ICAW, SIPFA, there will be some international ones that I'm just not aware of because I'm sat in the UK. But if they are a relevant qualified accountant, that person can then sign off your approval that you've done that role. If they are not a qualified accountant and there is nobody else who's a qualified accountant in your company, you would then need to ideally ask your company's auditor to countersign this. So your line manager would approve it, and then your auditor, who isn't a qualified accountant, can countersign this. If you still don't have someone in your company who's a qualified accountant, you don't have an auditor, ACCA have a partnership agreement where people like myself and other qualified accountants volunteer to then be matched up to students who need somebody to verify this. It's a bit like a mentoring scheme. And if you go on the ACCA website, you can say where you're based. That doesn't matter so much nowadays. We can all do this via Zoom. And you just have a meeting with that person every so often, and they will countersign what your line manager has approved. So ideally, somebody who's your line manager is an accountant. If not, you can use your company's auditors to countersign your line manager if there is an auditor. And then failing that, you can join the ACCA mentoring scheme where somebody will countersign your line manager approval of what they've done. But you need to add them to the dashboard in front of me. So there is a little section where you can add your approver, your supervisor. You need to put their name down. You need to put their email address down, because whenever you put something in to say, I've worked here for a year, they will get an automatic email sent from the ACCA website just asking them to approve this. They click a button to say yes, and then it's approved on the system. Same as when you fill out one of these learning outcomes, you have to fill out a document. I'll show you it in a second. When you do it, you submit it. ACCA will then automatically email the person that's down as your approver. They will hit, yes, that's true. They have done those things. And then it's kept up to date. So are there any questions so far?
The last question, let's say I went to clear management. Can I report when I start to report PER, or I
I'm struggling to hear you, I'm afraid.
Maybe you can pop your question into the chat and I can pick it up from there.
Yeah, I'm just going to try and the chat.
I do have Zolani who said, I worked as a manager in management accounting some 5 years ago. Is the experience obtained still relevant for my PER?
Yes, it would be. So the only caveat is it needs to be approved by somebody. And that approval needs to be whoever it was you worked for 5 years ago. So it depends what your relationship is like with them as to whether you can go back and say, hi, it's me. I worked for you 5 years ago. Do you remember me? And then are you willing for me to put your email address down so that when I put that I've worked there, it will ping across and you will authorize that. This is why it's key that you do it as you go along, because it's hard to go back unless you've got very good relationships with ex-bosses that they will be able to approve, and it might be that that former boss has moved on themselves. This is why I say, if you take nothing else away from this, do it as you're going along, because I've spoken to so many students when I've done this sort of webinar, and they've said, actually, what I did 5 years ago for 3 years, that would be relevant, and it would be, but it has to be verified by the person you worked for at that point. So it gets harder to go back and back and back, but a management accountant role is relevant, so that would count, providing it can be verified.
Excellent. I've got Elzan who asked, I've done my SICA articles, and can I use that for my PR? Who can I approach to get sign off? My understanding is that SICA articles can definitely be used for your PR experience, and you should go to the company where you did those articles and ask them for sign off.
Yeah, absolutely. I say the key thing is you can't present to your current employer, can you sign off this job I did 5 years ago? It has to be the person that you worked for at that time, which is why if you're doing this on an ongoing basis, you've got it all logged should you then change your job and not be able to go back to that past employer. But obviously, if you are able to go back, it needs to be approved by the person that supervised you at that point, because they can give you verification that it was true.
Sharissa said she thinks that what Elzan is asking is they've already been signed off by SICA. Does it need to be signed off again? Do I understand that? Elzan says, thanks, I'm still working at the company that signed me off originally. I completed my articles about 3 years ago. Yes, I think you should just redo it in the ACCA format and then get them to sign it off for you.
Yeah, that sounds, they've got to have it in this software, because then they've got a log of it. Then they can send it to the person that's going to authorize it, and it goes through their processes. But if you've already done enough for a previous qualification and that person is still able to verify for you, that would count. Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
So I'll just move on to some more slides, but obviously happy to take questions as they pop up. So you need to be logging on your employment details, your start date, your end date if you have ended, the hours that you work per week, and then obviously it will calculate how much you've got as your contribution to those 36 months. And then I say the key thing is it needs to have your approved employer verifying this. And you can see there, somebody asked earlier, is this an audit role? Is this a lecturing role? That's because it does count if you are lecturing, you're seen as being up to date and knowing the content. Once you've completed that, you've got this job and you've started it or worked it for 3 months, 4 months, you then just press to claim the time, and it's just like banking the time that you've got. So you just need to go in and request that that's contributing to your 36 months. But I say so far, I wish it was like that when I'd done my qualification. It's just so easy. You just put where you work, where the start date is, who your line manager is, if they're qualified, if not, somebody to countersign it, and then it's just automatically counting and ticking away. So this is for the actual time in a relevant role. And you can see that will then feed into your dashboard to show you nicely a visual of how much of that 36 months you've done and you have to go. And so you can go backwards, and you can, as long as it's approved by the person that you worked with 2 years ago or 3 years ago and it's relevant, you can go backwards. Okay, next bit I've got as we go down is you can see who your supervisor is, and that's where you need to put their name and their email. And people put people in there. They've been known to have people put their friends in there, relatives in there. It needs to be an approved person. ACCA do some spot checks to see that they are qualified, and they do send that automatic email expecting a response. So it is required that you obviously put a genuine person down there as your approver. Okay. Once you've got your time being logged, you then need to prove that you've got these objectives being covered. So there are some objectives which fulfill the full qualification. You have to do all 5 of the essentials, and then you have a choice of doing 4 from the technical. So you have to do all of the 5 and then 4 from 17 of these. These could be 3 from any one box and then just 1 from a different one. So you've got variable choice there, but you have to do the 5 essentials. Now, this is your ethics and professionalism. There are some examples in the ACCA website as to what might count. They give you a clue, which is fantastic, as to which exam papers you might cover this sort of topic. And that was my clue for when I was completing it as a student. I would look to see what the objective was. I would look to see which exam paper that is most likely to be in. And then I would flick through the topics of that exam paper and see what I've done to support the evidence. So for ethics and professionalism, I can tell you SBL and the audit papers would be the key feeder ones into that objective. So I would look through my audit papers and see that audit committees are on there, tests of control are on there, coming up with risk assessments are on there. So I would just flick through and go, that's the sort of thing they're expecting for that first essential. So the clue being which exam paper they've drawn those from. I would then come up with some examples from my real life as to what I've done. So I did some test of controls on payroll. They don't want to know personal information of clients, customers, so you've got to anonymize this, but they do want to know, I did this, I reconciled that. They don't want a generic copy of the course notes. They want to know, I attended an audit committee, I did a risk assessment on the new banking procedures. They want to know what you've actually done with examples, but taking out client names and anything that's creative to your client. But so the key thing was you've got to do these 5, and then these 5, as the other 17, will tell you which papers they have come from. And then you can just flick through your exam papers to see what the topics are, and then come up with examples from your real life. And I say you need to do a 300-word statement for each. I'll show you that in a second, but it's examples of I did this, I reconciled, I was in charge of a meeting, I convened the meeting. You've got leadership there. So I was mentoring a new trainee, and you can just come up with some examples from there. Now I can see I've got a question there.
We have a question from Zanele. Zanele, do you want to ask us? And then I'm going to go. Zanele said, I just want to find out how to go about if both you and your manager were retrenched and the company is no more.
Okay, if you and your manager are no longer working, you might not be able to bank that time. It depends if you're still in touch with that manager and they are willing to verify that you worked there. If you are not in touch with somebody from that ex-employment, you will not be able to bank it. And that is why you need to do this as you go along, because you never know when your company might go bust. You never know when you might find yourself looking for a new job, and perhaps you're not on good terms as you leave that employment. And I unfortunately have spoken to a number of students in my 15 years of teaching where they have lost a year, 18 months because they cannot go back, which is why it's key that you do this every 3 months. What did I do in these 3 months? Whilst it's fresh in your mind, but obviously also whilst you can then log it with somebody who's sat on the desk next to you rather than trying to go backwards. So as long as you are still in touch with the person that supervised you and they are willing and able to approve, that's fine. But if you have lost those contacts, unfortunately, you will have lost that time that you could have banked, which is a big example of why you do it going along.
Thank you, Claire. I have another interesting question because it speaks to something I didn't know. Mfundo says he's doing his psycho articles, and is it an option for him to wait and finish that until it's all signed off and then fill out the exemption form for the objectives he's achieved? So can you talk a little bit about the exemption form?
It's actually coming up in the slideshow. So
excellent. We will wait a bit.
I've actually got a slide on that coming up as to ways you might not have to do this. So
because that might also change Elzan's approach. But okay, we'll wait until it comes up. Thank you.
But it's coming up as to, this is what the normal student would need to do. There are some other ways that you might not need to do all of this. But I say the best way, and some perfect examples coming from the questions, is do it as you're going along. There are 5 key ones, which should be something each of you can come up with. And then this is why it's good. You only have to do 4 from 17. So you might work in audit, as I did, and I was thinking, how am I going to get tax? How am I going to get financial management? I could take 18, 19 and 20, all 3 from audit, which I was all over because that was my job, and then just 1 from a different area. So it's not as bad. You might choose to do 1 from each box just to get the breadth, but you do need to have, and this is why they've done 4. So you just have to broaden your horizons slightly. So as you're going along your role, your training, I would be showing this to my mentor, my line manager, and I'd be saying, no, were you willing to sign this off? This is what it is, and explain to them what it is. Give them a copy of the handbook from the ACCA website or a link to the objectives from the website. If they are a qualified accountant themselves, they will have done this and they will be fully understanding of what's required. And a lot of the bosses like to do it and reminisce about how they used to do it and it was different, and they like to get involved. So the best thing you can do when you're back at work is talk to the person you think is going to be the one to approve your experience, show them what's required, and then get this built into your appraisals every 3 or 6 months so you can revisit, have I got enough for my 4th technical box? And then maybe I could ask to do a 2-week secondment or a month secondment to a different area of the business. But by getting the line manager on board, 1, they'll approve this by the emails coming to them. And then secondly, they will help you get the breadth if your role is something that needs that extra 4th point away from your role. So that's again why it's good to do it as you're going along, because if you have a shortfall, you can get their help. And I say, I love doing this because it takes me back to when I was a student, and I am on the mentor scheme with ACCA. So I do this through their mentoring, and it's just nice, and people like to do this. So I think if you can get it into your training and that relationship you've got, then that will be really helpful. What you have to do is a 200 to 500 word statement for each of these 5 essentials, and those words go quickly. You're thinking, crikey, that's a lot. I had my study text, study books open, so I knew that leadership was from this paper, so I took words and bits to help me from that, and then put I did this, I did that, because they want to know the examples you can bring. And 200 to 500 words typed into the box disappears very fast. When writing your statements, say provide an example. I've seen so many students have their objectives rejected by ACCA because they just summarize, this is what leadership is, this is an audit committee, and they want to know, I attended an audit committee, I included this point on the agenda, but obviously not revealing personal information about the company. They want to know what you have done, and if you don't give examples, they will reject it. I say it's got to be personal to you, which is why you don't want to be where I was 3 years later thinking, did I do an audit committee? What did I do? Do it as you're going along whilst these are fresh in your mind. I'm guessing most of you do timesheets, so perhaps keep your timesheets and just do some notes next to it when you know you're trying to get some experience. So your performance objectives look like this. You've got your essentials, and then you've got your technical ones. And then what you do is you select which ones you're going to do. And then on the middle right of the screen, you can see there's a typed space for you to type your 200 to 500 words in with examples. There are some examples of what you should be doing on the ACCA website, but I say the key thing is they want to know what you have done, not a description of what leadership is or motivation. They want to know, I did this in my job, obviously taking the company names out. So you need to do those, and that's the 300-ish words. Once you've saved it, it will then go to the person who you've got as your approver, and then they'll look at it and go, never known to do that, or yes, that's fine, and they'll approve it. So that's why you need to have that good open relationship with your approver. You can then see your log of how many you've done, how many elements are completed and to go. It's so user friendly, it's very much Windows based, and you can see the visuals, and you can save your statements before you actually then bank it and save it. So you can save it as you go along before you actually then support and submit it. And they've shown you a few as to how you would claim and what elements. So there are clues and keys as to what you should be trying to look for. And once it's gone, you can then send it to your approver with a little note saying, I've just done another one. So you can send a note so it goes in their email, and they know then just to press that they can approve that. So when it's ready to go, you send it to your approver with a little note saying, I've just done my objective on corporate governance. Can you sign it off? Submit it. They will hopefully have a read of it and then approve it for you. So who can be a supervisor? I've touched on this already, but it's somebody ideally who's a qualified accountant. They don't have to be ACCA, and there are lots of international qualifications as well. It should be somebody who can help you word it, help you streamline your work so it's getting these objectives. Who can be a qualified one, a non-qualified who is countersigned, and countersigned might be your company auditor, or it might be you have to reach out to ACCA as one of the mentor schemes that they do, but it can be always approved. You add your supervisor along with their qualifications, so they do ask to check it's not your friend. I have seen that, and you can check which qualifications are recognised on the IFAC link that is on your per objectives. Any questions so far on sort of what you have to do and who can supervise before I then tell you the alternative routes, which was the earlier question? Are we all okay? I say take nothing.
Yes, all good.
Do it as you're going along. So thank you. Yeah, do it as you're going along, because it's hard to go back. You always hope you leave an employer on good terms, but you never know when that person might leave themselves, and trying to track them down. I know we've got social media and it's easier, but just do it as you go along, and it makes it nice and interactive and helps you plan your career as well. Okay, so what I've shown you is a student who just needs to log their approval for 3 years. Some employers have an agreement with ACCA. So we're talking the big KPMGs, PwCs. Some industries have so many trainees and they have a graduate or a training program that ACCA have been approached by these employers, and they have agreed that it will count towards the qualification. So when I was training, I started my training with a big firm. It was Grant Thornton. And I didn't have to log my practical experience, because I just went, I work for Grant Thornton, and they went, that's a good company. They've got lots of trainees. They get the breadth of coverage. They will have got good experience. And it's ones that don't have that agreement with ACCA. The reason they probably don't have the agreement is there's not as many students that it made it worthwhile. The employer has to do a few bits and exercises to prove that they are worthy enough that they can then just let their students sign a piece of paper. So if you have only a few students, it's not worth your employer's efforts. If you have a lot of students, the employer will probably have already done this, and they've gone to ACCA, they've said, we want to just get our students to say they work for us. ACCA will then do a little bit of an inspection, ask for some evidence. They'll then do an inspection every couple of years to check that nothing's changed, but those students can just put that they work for an approved employer, and they don't need to do all of the things that I have just shown you. Now, you need to find out if your employer is on that list, and if you go to the ACCA website, you can look to see if you've got an approved employer. But you probably know where you work, whether it's one of the big ones with a lot of students, or whether it's one where you're probably going to have to go it alone and do the process that I've shown you. So big employers will have got this arrangement with ACCA where they just say they are an approved employer. Now that goes back to the earlier question, worth checking out with ACCA if there is an arrangement for cross transfer of experience from earlier qualifications. So I know when people do qualifications and then just switch to top up with the final ones, final exams for ACCA, you'll find that you don't need to do the full 36 months, but a normal student will have to do the full 36 months, get it all countersigned, unless there are the exemptions of an approved employer. If you are an approved employer student, you still have to tick and sign that you are aware of these and that you've looked at these. You don't just go, I work for them, and sign. You have to prove that you've got a disclaimer. So you have done enough in your job, and you are self-certifying that you've done enough for the essentials, and for which of the optional ones, the 4 of the 17, you would have done. And I say, you can see there is a web link, and if you just Google ACCA per objectives or per, there's a big handbook, and it tells you about how you can check out the objectives you need to do, who can supervise, and then they've got information about approved suppliers, approved employers there as well. It might be that you don't know anything about this and you think, we work for a company that's got loads of ACCA people, in which case it's worth approaching your training body to go, do you think you could do this to save me having to do my experience? They do have to do quite a lot of paperwork and on an ongoing basis. So if there's only 1 or 2 of you, it's not worth their while. But say when you get to the likes of 20, 30, 40 students, it's getting more like it's worthwhile. And then I've got my ethics module. This is the fairly new, I didn't have to do this, but a fairly new qualification, which has to be done as the 3rd aspect. So you've got exams, you've got your practical experience, and then you've also got your ethics module, which you're eligible to do once you sit your first applied skills paper. And latest statistics that came out this week, you are 25% more likely to pass SBL if you do the ethics module just before it. It's on the ACCA website. It's one which you can go into and do bits of it as you go along. And it has a new, from the 1st of April, presentation requirement. So you have to do a short recorded presentation, submit that, and then you, along with some peers, will review each other's as a bit of a peer review. And that's something new that came up from the 1st of April of this year, this new requirement for a presentation. But please don't worry about that. That's nothing huge. And it's good for your career as well. So if you've any questions, you've obviously got the guide. So there is the per objective guide. It gives you more information about the different objectives. So you can see there on the screen, it talks about PO1, Performance Objective 1, which is an essentials. It's got the ethics one, and it gives you examples, ideas, and which papers they can be seen in. It talks to you about why they are good. You've got dream jobs, you look to see what your dream job is, and then perhaps which of the objectives will be the best ones to prepare you for that. So there's a new competency framework that's on the website as well. You've got your careers as well. So if you want to look for a job, there's lots on there on the ACCA careers website. So any questions? Hopefully that was useful to see.
That was excellent. I'm going to ask for some questions around PER and the topics you've discussed, and then I would just like to take a moment to answer Ephraim. He said, which of the 4 professional level exams have a better pass rate? And I managed to find the pass rates and can pull it up. But I don't want to skip to that topic if there's still somebody wanted to ask 1 or 2 questions about PER.
Okay, so that question was which of the option papers are the easiest or best to do? And I actually did a presentation on this the other day. So the option papers, as you know, have pass rates down there in, I've just got them from March 21 because they've just been put on the ACCA website, in the 30s and 40% for the ACCA global pass rates. So they are much lower. SBL, SBR are the highest at about 50, 52. And then your applied skills are anything from 40 up to about 45. So the option papers are by far the lowest ones. Now, I always say the best thing to do is not pick which has the best pass rates, but to pick the one that you performed best at in your lower papers. So look to see whether you were better at doing TX, because that would mean you'll be better at doing ATX as your option paper. Obviously, PM feeds into APM, FM into AFM, and AA into AAA. So I think the best thing you can do is look at your earlier performance, look at your enjoyment of those earlier papers, choose the one you liked as long as you had quite good performance. And then also think about, what job do I want to do as I go forward? And if you want to work in practice, in audit and tax, I would recommend that you obviously do AAA and tax. If you're looking at, looking at the pass rates that you need to have, so thank you, that's very familiar. Looking at the pass rates alone is not enough. Look at your performance. So thank you, Nikki's just pulled up the ACCA pass rates. So you can see there the ACCA pass rates on the left. The BPP momentum pass rates are ones for students that are studying our program. So if you are a BPP student, you obviously do the talk course, revision course. We also then do achievement ladder steps, which are the ongoing assessments. So it's always better to do more tests as you go along. And you can see the uplift there is about 30% for students that are doing the momentum pass rates. So students in the program.
Sorry, just to clarify for our audience, this would be the BPP momentum that's referred to is what IBTC offers as what we call the online classroom.
Yeah.
So the online classroom is really the BPP's online classroom product, which makes use of BPP Momentum. Just from a terminology perspective, the BPP Momentum is thus the IBTC online classroom that we are selling in South Africa.
So that takes into account all the examiner feedback. It tests students on the areas that we know are always commonly examined. And you can see there, that's why the pass rates are so much higher, because obviously we know where to focus the attention. But please choose it based on performance, enjoyment, where your career hopes to go, rather than which ones are the easiest. In terms of which are easiest, I don't think anyone is easier than the other. You can make it easier by choosing the better paper for you, and that obviously depends on your past experience and your aspirations.
I like that. It's we say similar things to students when they say, what study method must I choose? Can I study online? What is better, home study or online or coming to classes? And the answer is always, what is better for you?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm going to take one more question from Zolani. He says, I'm working for an ACCA approved employer, who's the National Audit Office, in the support business unit finance and not in core business auditing. Do I also qualify to use that to obtain some exemption in PER?
I would suspect so. When you said it was the National Audit Office and approved employers, they don't look to see which department you are in usually. So yes, that would be one which is an approved employer. Worth checking out, but I would expect that would be an approved employer with the exemptions.
Excellent. Zolani just left us and I just let him back in. So Zolani, in case you missed it, the answer to that is we suspect that the answer is yes. Lenovo says, thank you for the presentation. I had ignored
I did.
I
did, and I wish somebody had done this presentation to me. I mean, it's so much easier than when I was filling it out mine 20 years ago, because obviously it's an electronic version which leads you through and it automates this sending it to your employer, so it gets done immediately. But I wish somebody had told me this is what's required. Do it as you're going along. And when I tell students to do it as they're going along, they just nod and nod. And it's only when I show them screenshots of this is how simple it is, and this is why you need to be thinking, I'm sat here doing the audit exam, what things are going to be relevant to obviously my performance objective for the audit.
I've got one question, and after that I'm going to call it a night or a day. So that you can go for your vaccination. And it is from Mfnod, who's had his hand up for a while. Do you maybe want to unmute and ask your question? Oh, I see, it's Mfundo, sorry.
Hi, thank you. My question was currently answered because I was just going to ask about the exemption since I work for an approved employer. In terms of, I remember you said I should check on the website if the employer is actually approved before considering if I should wait for the 3 years. So I think you answered my question when you were answering Zolani.
Brilliant. I'd say check on the website. Also ask your employer, because if they've gone through the hassle of having to get this approved status, they will know about it. So either ask your training department or also check on that website, because if they've done this, it should be up to date. It should be on the website, and obviously good for them to check it is as well. So much easier if you work for an approved employer. But it's not hard work if you don't, and they say just do it as you go along.
Excellent, excellent. Loud and clear, we hear you. Do it as you go along. And I don't want to rush you, but I do want to let you go because it is so important.
Yeah, oh, it's fine. We do have another session.
We do.
I'm sure Nikki will tell me when it is. It's another session that I'm doing. Let me do a plug, and then Nikki will tell you when.
I'll tell you. It's in May.
Is it May?
Yes. Oh, wait. I'm
13th, I think.
Let's see. Yes. Yeah, on 13th at 6 o'clock, 13 May at 6 o'clock. It is us again. Look out for the marketing or invitations around it. And if you can't find it, email info@ibtc.co.za. Otherwise, the link will be on our website. It's always on our homepage. It says upcoming events, I believe. And that's it from us. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you so much, Claire.
That's fine. The session on the 13th of May, please do attend. It's me again, but it's where I'm going to be looking through the CBE software. So I'm going to be looking at how do you prepare for the CBE exams, demonstrating the do's and don'ts, and showing you the resources that are out there. I say a big reason people fail is they don't look at the CBE software and study appropriately for it. So I'll be looking at applied skills and strategic professional CBEs, and it's the 13th of May, which is just as you are getting ready for your June sitting exams. So it's perfect timing. We've left it just before you do your revision for those exams.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good luck for tonight for your
Brilliant.
JAB, and
Thank
all the
you.
best.
Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you everyone for your time as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.